Good morning. I want to welcome everyone here to the first hearing in Town Hall of the newly created bipartisan Legislative Delta Caucus. The Delta Caucus was formed back in January to bring a more unified voice among legislators representing areas of the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta, and immediate tributaries. And I want to thank my colleagues that will be here shortly, but also my co-chair and Senator Bill Dodd for being here with this Town Hall. We also have many of the county and local representatives who I want to thank for being here today. Sacramento County Supervisor Don Natoli, San Joaquin County Supervisor Kathy Miller. Is San Joaquin County Supervisor Chuck Wynn here yet? Not yet, okay. We'll acknowledge him when he does come. Solano County Supervisor Skip Thompson, and Contra Costa County Supervisor Diane Burgess. I want to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule for being here to support the Delta Caucus. So with a price tag of over $17 billion, many of us have sticker shock and want to know what, if any, benefit there is for this high cost of this project. We want to know how DWR and water contractors plan to finance a project that some large water districts have determined as too costly. Just last month, the State Auditor released a scathing report on the proposed WaterFix project that found the Department of Water Resources incurred significant cost increases. Approved costs have already gone from $13 million to over $250 million in just for planning alone. DWR has employed a project manager, Hallmark, that has also subcontracted management, tacking on an additionally roughly 5% to the cost of each subcontract. A U.S. Department of the Interior investigation found that the Bureau of Reclamation was providing illegal subsidies flowing through the Central Valley project. The water contractor to provide about $50 million in funding to WaterFix. Ongoing research by Dr. Jeffrey Michael has found that the WaterFix project would only provide a benefit from 23 cents on the dollar to no more than 39 cents on the dollar. And if we all had a budget like that, we'd be bankrupt. In my own district, restoration of the Dutch Slough, which incurred more in planning costs, and this is something that was entitled in 2002 and has been in planning for 15 years. It incurred more planning costs before any shovel is used than it would have cost to actually restore. And people have worked half their working life on this project just to attain this project alone. And you think about it, that's 15 years of lost attainment for a restoration of wetlands. Another study comparing costs of the coastal aqueduct to Santa Barbara with the projections of the Delta tunnels determined that when debt service is taken into account, the tunnels will cost between $51 billion and $100 billion. These findings over the financial outlook of the Delta Tunnels project are shocking. It's appalling there seems to be so little return on such an astronomical cost. Before we kick off the presentations with the State Auditor's Office, I'd love for you to hear from Senator Dodd, one of my valued caucus members.
Thank you very much. Get on here. I want to thank my co-chairman, Assemblymember Jim Frazier, and his staff for putting on this town hall today. For most of us here on the dais and the people we represent, the proposed WaterFix is a major concern. Impacts on Delta ecology, water quality, and agriculture are among the more serious questions that have not been satisfactorily answered. The recent completed audit by Ms. Howell and her team reveals some gaps and problems in the process of moving this project forward. What concerns me the most is the auditor's finding that DWR has not completed an economic or financial analysis to demonstrate the financial viability of the project. This concerns me greatly because financial resources to develop and secure a sustainable water supply for domestic, agriculture, and environmental needs is finite. Whether those resources are user-financed or financed by the taxpayers, we must ensure that dollars are spent on water investments with the highest return. So I'm here today to listen intently, to learn more about what still needs to be done to determine whether the proposed WaterFix is a good investment or not. I think that we've got a lot of people in this room. Honestly, I was 2 years in the Assembly, Jim's colleague over there. I've been 1 year in the Senate. And in both my districts that really have a lot of people that live in and around the Delta or influenced by the Delta, I've only had one person in 3 years ever in my district, any of my districts, say they support this project. So with that in mind, I certainly will listen intently to what we have, the testimony that we're going to hear today. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Dodd. And as we opened up, Senator Glazier was able to join us. Would you like to say a few words, Senator?
Thank you. This is working. Hear me? No. Try this one. All right. There we go. Well, I want to first say thanks to our wonderful co-chairs, Assemblyman Frazier and Senator Dodd, for their leadership on this issue. We benefit from their and their staff's work and following what's happening here very closely. I have many communities in my district that we share that are on the Delta, that are affected by all the things that are being discussed here in regard to the Delta, and of course there's great concern in which I share. I want to thank all the folks that are here to listen and to testify. I look forward to hearing the facts and the real impacts that have all of us quite concerned, and I appreciate the chairs for convening this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. While we're at it, I'd like to acknowledge some of our VIPs that have also attended. Former Rio Vista Mayor Jan Vick, Assembly Member Tim Grayson's Ledger John Ackler, Rio Vista Council Member Constance Boulware, Congressman Jerry McNerney's attendant Gary Prost, Congressman John Garamendi's Field Rep Angel Melchor, and looks like more people will be showing up presently. So what I'd like to do is kick this town hall off, going forward with our first presenters, which will be the California State Auditor's Office. Mike Tilden is our audit principal, and Jordan Wright, our audit supervisor. I guess what we'll end up doing is sharing the podium over here, and please give us your stuff.
Chairman and members, I'm Mike Tilden, and I'm an audit principal at the California State Auditor's Office. As you said, joining me are my colleagues Jordan Wright, he was the team leader on this audit, and also Mary Lundeen was our staff counsel. The legislature asked us to examine the funds that DWR spent on the planning and design of WaterFix, and so Jordan and I are going to discuss the results of our audit, including our recommendations. The first thing that we noted is that the planning phase had significant cost increases and schedule delays. And the first part of that was the cost and timeline for preparing the BDCP, the plan itself, increased because of the scale and complexity of the project. The initial budget for preparing the BDCP was $13 million, and that included $7 million for consultant and other costs, and those are supposed to be split between the Department of Water Resources, the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority, and the Mirren Corporation. So at the beginning, DWR entered into a $1.6 million agreement with the Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District Zone 7, and that was intended to cover the costs of another consultant that would come in and actually prepare the BDCP and to cover Zone's costs for managing the costs of that contract. However, DWR later amended that contract 3 different times, which increased the cost to $7.7 million, which was nearly 5 times the original contract amount, and extended the term by 3 years. Although DWR did not fully track the BDCP funding or the spending, the authority indicated that it also contributed $5 million towards the preparation of the BDCP, but we don't have any data on Mirren's share of the BDCP costs. Fast forward to 2010, Zone 7 stopped managing the BDCP consultant, but the costs for preparing the plan continued to go up because DWR entered into a direct contract with that same consultant to continue preparing the plan, and that ultimately increased costs by another $41 million. So all told, we estimate that the total cost of preparing the BDCP itself rose from an initial $13 million budget to approximately $60 million. On top of that, there were costs to plan for the potential implementation of the BDCP and other various alternatives, including WaterFix, that also increased significantly. Specifically, in March 2009, DWR put together a $140 million budget that was to cover the evaluation of planning efforts, but a year later, DWR reassessed the scope, the technical needs, and the schedule for those planning efforts, and that led to a $100 million increase in the budget. Ultimately, DWR exhausted that revised $240 million budget and contributed another $15 million in 2015 and 2016 to fund additional planning costs. At that same time, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the authority also together contributed another $7 million. So at the end of June 2017, we estimate that total planning costs had reached approximately $280 million. The other thing that we found is that DWR has not completed either an economic or a financial analysis for WaterFix to demonstrate the financial viability of the project. And this is despite its own policy stating that these analyses are critical elements of the planning process. The idea behind the economic analysis is that it should really measure the costs and benefits of the project from a statewide perspective. And the financial analysis is critical in determining whether or not there are enough water contractors that are willing and able to pay for the construction costs of WaterFix. So going back to 2012, DWR did issue a task order for a subcontractor, the Brattle Group, to prepare an economic analysis for the BDCP, and it had a budget of $434,000. Based on the various task order amendments that we took a look at, that was a very lengthy project or process, and it included a number of scope changes due to changes in the project's costs, the footprint, revisions to the draft BDCP, and input from a variety of stakeholders. So fast forward 3 years later into 2015, DWR canceled the remaining work on that initial economic analysis and directed the Brattle Group to instead perform an economic analysis for WaterFix, for which it allocated another $356,000. In 2016, DWR did make public an incomplete draft of the economic analysis for WaterFix, and that was in response to a Public Records Act request, but to date it has not finalized that analysis. In 2012, DWR also contracted with another consultant, this was Public Finance Management, to facilitate the completion of a financial analysis for the project. And the general objectives of the contract were really to reach agreement on fair and affordable cost allocations and establishing a reliable financing plan for implementing the project. However, at the time of our audit, no final decisions on cost allocations had been made or on the interim financing, and that was largely because negotiations with the state and federal water contractors were still ongoing. At the time, DWR officials told us that they couldn't finalize either the economic analysis or the financial analysis until understanding which agencies would be participating and funding the project and at what level. They also told us that once those agencies, the individual water agencies, define their level of participation through their various board processes, then DWR would finalize and issue both an economic analysis and a financial analysis. In this area, we put together a number of recommendations. The first recommendation was to improve the management of large and complex infrastructure projects. We recommended that the legislature enact legislation that would require all agencies to basically publicly report significant changes in either the cost or the schedule of these large projects if they're expected to exceed their budget by 10% or their schedule by 12 months. In terms of DWR, we also recommended that it develop and implement a project reporting policy that would require its management staff to basically document and justify decisions to proceed on these large infrastructure projects if they are expected to, again, exceed their budget by 10% or their schedule by 12 months. We also recommended that DWR should make these documented decisions and justifications publicly available and should have the Resources Agency review and approve them. In terms of the economic analysis and the financial analysis, we basically recommend that DWR needs to complete both of those analyses as soon as possible and make them publicly available. Another issue that we talked about in our report is that DWR to this point has not fully implemented a governance structure that would basically manage the design and construction phase of the project. So in order to prepare for the potential approval of WaterFix, we recommended that DWR develop an appropriate governance structure so that it's ready to oversee that design and construction phase. We also found that DWR did not follow their proper procedures when they replaced the program manager for the project, and my colleague Jordan Wright is going to discuss that.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Jordan Wright. I'm a senior auditor with the State Auditor's Office. As my colleague said, I was the team lead for our audit of the WaterFix project. One of the things that the legislature asked us to look at was the way that DWR selected the program manager for this WaterFix project. This is the individual that's dealing with the day-to-day management of the project. When state entities contract for these types of services, project management services for construction and engineering projects, state law requires that the individual or the firm selected has on staff a licensed engineer, a licensed architect, or a licensed general contractor. Similarly, state law requires that those contracts be awarded based on demonstrated competence and professional qualifications. It's a slightly different process than the normal state contracting process. In that normal state process, the state is looking for a responsive bidder at the lowest cost. So when state agencies are contracting for these construction and engineering services, the state allows agencies to pay a little bit more, but they're looking for the best qualified consultant. We found that in 2008, DWR followed those requirements in initially selecting the program manager that was providing those program management services and engineering support services. They followed a relatively robust competitive process and ultimately selected the firm URS as their program manager. In URS's proposal, they had identified the team that they would be providing as well as the individual who would be the program manager. However, about a year after DWR selected URS, they exercised a provision in the contract to remove the program manager, apparently because he was not working full-time on the project. When this occurred, we expected that DWR would have requested that URS provide an equally qualified replacement who could work full-time on the project, as they had contracted. We found instead that DWR had actually directed URS to subcontract with a firm, the Hallmark Group, to provide those program management services. This resulted in two problems. The first was that Hallmark did not have on staff an individual with the required license. They didn't have the licensed architect, engineer, or general contractor. Similarly, DWR wasn't able to provide us any evidence that they had followed a competitive process and evaluated Hallmark's competence and qualifications to provide those services. When we asked DWR about this, they indicated that they had received a recommendation from Metropolitan Water District to hire Hallmark for these services. We reached out to Metropolitan Water District, spoke with the general manager, and he confirmed to us that yes, Metropolitan had provided that recommendation. However, he also explained that Metropolitan had never worked with Hallmark before and that he had received that name from a third party. As we looked into some of the additional allowability of the contract, DWR had explained to us that they believed it was legally permissible for URS to subcontract those services. And while we don't disagree that there's an ability to subcontract, we had concerns with the way that DWR actually created that contractual relationship. And in particular, we found that it wasn't a true contractor-subcontractor relationship. In the normal relationship, the contractor would have responsibility for its subcontractor's work. It would determine when payments are made and so forth. In the amendment that DWR drafted to bring Hallmark on as the subcontractor, there was specific language in that amendment that gave DWR the authority to approve all payments and indicated that Hallmark would report directly to and receive direction from DWR. In our estimation, that was not a subcontractor relationship, and therefore should have been a contract that was awarded through the competitive process. Similarly, that relationship actually created some conflict because Hallmark was brought in as a subcontractor, but as the program manager, they had responsibilities for directing URS staff. So it was a situation where URS, as the prime contractor, had authority over payments, but they would be basing those payments on the entity that's basically telling them what to do and directing their work. And so that's where DWR stepped in to add those provisions to the contract. Ultimately, this led to administrative inefficiencies, and in 2013, DWR actually removed those program management services, that component, from the URS contract and awarded it directly to Hallmark. When they awarded that contract, it was a $4 million contract, and again, their explanation was that Hallmark has had 3 years on the project and they've demonstrated that they have the qualifications to provide the services. Again, we had concerns that at the outset, Hallmark didn't have the required license and they didn't have the demonstrated qualifications to be there in the first place, and so those 3 years of experience, they really shouldn't have been able to gain that if DWR had followed that process. The last thing that I want to mention is just related to the cost of the contract. Although initially it was a $4 million contract, because DWR didn't accurately calculate the term of the contract, it eventually increased to roughly $14 million. As with our other areas, we had recommendations related to contracting. We recommended that DWR make sure, in particular as it moves forward into design and construction and bringing on additional contractors, that all of those architectural and engineering contracts be awarded through the competitive process as required by law. Also, that DWR document and maintain their evidence of the evaluation they do of those qualifications, both for contractors and any subcontractors. Similarly, we recommended to them that once the initial contract award is made, if subcontractors are brought on after the fact, that the prime contractor should be the entity that's making that decision, and DWR should then be vetting the subcontractors that are proposed and approving those. With that, I think we're available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. All I can say honestly is thank God for the State Auditor's Office. This audit parted ways with the initial request, and please explain how that happened.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So this audit parted ways with its initial request. Please explain how that happened. How did it grow into this?
So from the initial request, I think I can speak to some of the changes that occurred. As we began looking at the planning process, we realized there were several elements of that planning process that really are going to lead into more of the design and construction elements. We weren't specifically asked to look at financial and economic analyses, but as we began looking at that planning process, we identified those as being key elements that had not yet been performed.
Thank you for that. Are there any other issues that you found that call for an additional audit on WaterFix?
I don't think any of the things that we were asked to look at originally would require additional audit.
So there was nothing that you found that suggested there should be any further audit? All right, thank you.
So in your audit, how much of the management has been retained by Hallmark, and how often has Hallmark subcontracted out its management services also?
So Hallmark did maintain the program manager position, so they had the ultimate responsibility for that, for those services. They did eventually subcontract with 4 additional subcontractors for different elements, different work products that needed to be created that they did not have the expertise to provide.
So are you aware of any, if this kind of mismanagement is typical among any other DWR projects?
No, I don't have any experience with other DWR projects. I don't believe our office has conducted additional audits of them in recent years.
And then also finally, are you aware of any kind of oversight other than what you have accomplished? Just like the High-Speed Rail Authority has a peer review committee that comes in and annually reviews the Transportation Authority's work. Is there any kind of oversight in place that possibly you could recommend going forward to this caucus?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of, Assembly Member, any that are currently in place, and I think that leads to the recommendation that my colleague mentioned. Our recommendation both to the legislature and to DWR was to implement this reporting process that's going to help with the transparency of decisions that are made, delays or increases that may occur, so that those interested stakeholders can have input in the process.
Senator Glazier or Assemblymember McCarty, have any questions of the Auditor's Office? I want to also acknowledge and thank Assemblymember Kevin McCarty for coming Sacramento area and attending our caucus briefing. Thank you so very much for your presentation. So we'll move on to our second presenters, which is the State Auditor's Office. The second presenter will be the Department of Water Resources, Cindy Messer, who's the Chief Deputy Director to respond to the audit of the and present finances of WaterFix. Thank you for responding and attending today.
Yes, excuse me, absolutely. And before I begin, I just want to introduce my colleague, Ken Bogdan, who, much like our colleagues from the Auditor's Office, will probably tag team a little bit. So, okay, well, first of all, good morning. And I want to say thank you on behalf of the Department of Water Resources for inviting us to this informational hearing today and opening up the channels of dialogue around this particular subject. So what I thought I would do is provide a quick update on where we're at with the Cal WaterFix project. So through the planning process, where have we landed through all of that? Then have a quick response to the audit report, and then wrap things up and obviously be happy to answer any questions. So starting with some updates from this year and then a look into this next year. As you know, the WaterFix is a science-driven project that will upgrade the state's current outdated water delivery system and will help maintain a reliable source of water for 25 million Californians and more than 3 million acres of farmland in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Central Valley, and Southern California, while at the same time addressing ecosystem issues in the Delta region. It's a critical element of the state's overall strategy for addressing things like climate change, sea level rise, other natural disasters such as earthquakes and flooding, and in order to provide a reliable water source for the future. And these are all actions that are outlined in the governor's California Water Action Plan, this being one piece of those suite of tools. So in this year, in 2017, the project has marked several key milestones, and we're working intently to advance the project through its remaining steps, which extend into 2018. So a few of the key milestones in terms of permitting and regulatory requirements that we should note that have occurred over this last year include the release of the final environmental impact report and impact statement in December of 2016, so kind of towards the beginning, the end of last year, the beginning of this year, we released the final EIR, EIS. And then in June, we received our completed biological opinions from both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the NOAA NIMFS organizations that helped us complete the Federal Endangered Species Act compliance requirements. In July of this year, the CEQA process was completed through certification of the final EIR and the issuance of the notice of determination by the department, thereby having our approval of the project itself. In August of this year, we received our Section 2018 incidental take permit from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and that completed compliance requirements with the California Endangered Species Act. And then lastly, the Department of Water Resources, along with our federal partners, the Bureau of Reclamation, have been working through the State Water Resources Control Board proceedings for our petition to change the point of diversion, and we completed part 1 of those proceedings this year. We'll be entering into part 2 starting in January of 2018. The other milestone that I wanted to talk about briefly was the work, and the state auditors representatives talked a bit about this as well, and that is in fall of this year, so in the October-November timeframe, many of the public water agencies, their board of directors held meetings in which they looked at the California WaterFix project and they took a vote whether or not to participate in the project. And all of the state water project agencies that had these meetings, had a vote, did opt to participate in the project. Now, having said that, there are more meetings, there are more dialogue that the public water agencies will have, and we anticipate that there will be meetings to finalize outstanding questions, to finalize participation, and that level of participation likely through the spring of 2018. But I wanted to note that that starts a process by which we are beginning to get some of the critical information that we need to complete some of the key tasks moving ahead that I'll touch upon in just a second. So moving into 2018, the way that I think about the major tasks that lie ahead of us is to complete permitting, regulatory requirements, and those processes. We will continue to monitor the public water agencies and their board meetings and where they end up in terms of participation in the project, and then how that rolls into completing several key tasks that I know this caucus is very interested in, including the completion of a financial analysis and an economic analysis for the WaterFix project. So just in terms of what we have left to do in terms of permitting and regulatory activities, I did mention part 2 of the State Water Resources Control Board proceedings will begin in January, and we will move through those through a large part of 2018. And there are other key regulatory permits that we've undertaken the processes already, for example, the Army Corps permits, and those will continue, and we'll bring those to completion as well. And then just lastly, and I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but I'm trying to kind of lead up to the idea of the key elements here around these analyses. So as the public water agencies complete the additional meetings, the dialogue, they have to have their own individual analyses of finances and financial participation and other elements. We will be able to retain or receive, I should say, the information out of those meetings and where everybody lands, and that's the critical piece of the puzzle that we need to complete the 2 analyses, financial, economic. So as mentioned in the auditor's report, and I'm going to quote it here because I think it's a good lead up to talking about how we're going to work through this in the early part of next year. But one of the recommendations that came out of the auditor's report was to ensure that DWR manages WaterFix in an effective manner. DWR should complete both the economic analyses and financial analyses for WaterFix and make sure that the analyses are publicly available as soon as possible. So we will do that. We have committed to that, but it's a timing issue at this point. We are just short of having the last of the critical participation information that will allow us to bring that together and produce these final reports. And so that would be something we would do moving into the new year. And then the last piece I wanted to talk about for 2018 was preparing for implementation of WaterFix when and if the project is approved. And I know this was touched upon a little bit as well by the State Auditor representatives, but there's two pieces that I just wanted to bring before the caucus members this morning. One is this idea of a governance structure. So as we move ahead, one of the recommendations from the audit report was that in order to properly manage this next phase, this design and construction phase, that we should begin to prepare for that and ensure that project is managed properly through the phase, and that we should take some initial steps in the governance structure. So there is a proposed governance structure that was developed by some of the consultants that were discussed in the audit report. Many of those elements will move forward at the appropriate time when we enter implementation of the WaterFix. But I wanted to put that out here this morning that this is a structure that we have information on. We had consultants that provided at least the initial beginnings of that, and we will be ready to implement something when and if the time comes. So we won't be starting from scratch on the governance structure. The other piece of moving forward in 2018, and keep in mind, we recognize, there are still elements we're working through, but in order to manage a schedule and manage and be prepared to enter into implementation, we need to be looking at the resources and the expertise we would need for the design and construction phase. So part of that is beginning to move forward with looking at consultants and looking at expertise we would need. And as some of you may be aware, we are doing an industry day next week in which we will at least beginning to put the word out on the types of areas of expertise needed at the point in time in which we begin implementation of the WaterFix project. So all of these steps we're starting. It's early. All of these actions of putting a governance structure in place, bringing additional expertise on board for design and construction will take a long time take a good deal of time to get in place, and there's a lot of preparatory or administrative steps ahead of actually getting those pieces in place, and that's why we want to start on those beginning in 2018, well, actually beginning now, but also into 2018. So I'd like to just offer a few quick responses to the auditing report, and then I'll wrap things up. So first off, I would like to thank Ms. Howell and her staff for their hard work and clearly their dedication to what they do. We did spend about 10 months together, spent a lot of time together, recognized that they had a mountain of information to go through, and they conducted numerous interviews and did a lot of engagement with DWR staff as they did their research. So I just wanted to acknowledge that they did a very good job over a long period of time. A couple notes. First off is as a primary focus of this particular audit, the legislature asked for a review of DWR's expenditures in the planning process. And there was a specific ask in terms of whether or not state funds or general funds were being used for the planning process in the initial design. And we were pleased that the auditor's report verified that indeed no state funds were used in the planning process, so no general funds were used to date, that the funding received for planning and initial design of WaterFix came from those that would be beneficiaries of the project. We were also want to acknowledge, and we're pleased to see the dialogue around how complex this particular project is, and that planning for this most definitely what entailed extensive stakeholder outreach, extensive outreach with our regulatory agencies, and that indeed over the decade by which this project, the planning phase, has taken, there have been many changes, and those changes are a result of all of the good input that we received from stakeholders, our partners, regulatory agencies, and so on. One of the points I just wanted to make, and we say this in our response, our formal response to the audit report, is there should be a clear distinction in these types of large projects, but even maybe smaller projects that require a lot of planning and environmental compliance and regulatory requirements. The planning phase is most definitely complicated, especially when you're working on water projects or water policy in this state, as I think everybody here, and I see a lot of familiar faces, know this world very well. So for us, the planning phase, of course, would be complicated and long and expensive and requires changes and flexibility. You start out with a scope, you start to solicit input, whether it's through stakeholder meetings, town hall meetings, the CEQA process, and then you need to take all of that input back in and determine how that may shift or change the scope of your project for the better. But that all requires time and staff workload and consultants and expertise. And so versus this next phase, which is the implementation phase, which I think, while the work will be complicated and lengthy, it's far more contained, I think, in terms of knowing what you need to do, knowing what the schedule is, the budget, the tasks. So if you've had a chance to look at the responses to the auditing report, that's one distinction we wanted to make, is that we think these are two very different types of phases. And the one that we are exiting out of was hugely complex and complicated. The audit did question some of our management practices, our maintenance of program information, and the legality of our contracting approach. Within all of these findings in the report, there were definitely items and recommendations that the department agreed with. There were others that we did not agree with. And again, for the sake of time, I won't go through them in any great detail, but we have outlined them at length in our response, our formal response. But as a result of this audit, the department is taking steps overall to make changes in documentation, in project management, and other activities as we move forward. And we will be checking in and providing updates to the State Auditor's Office on regular intervals as described or required in the audit report. So we'll be making sure that they know where we're at in implementing their suggestions and any improvements that we might make outside of those. So again, I think I just want to wrap this section up by saying that I know probably the primary topic today for this hearing is the financial feasibility, financial analyses, and economic analyses. Again, the department is in a place where we are waiting for the public water agencies, who must go through their processes to determine their participation, look at the financial information. That's the last piece of this very complicated puzzle for us that will allow us to produce these reports early next year. And I had another point, but it just slipped my mind, so maybe I'll circle back if I remember it. But I think I just wanted to mention that I think it's captured in the audit report as well, is in terms of the financial analyses, there was information that the department retained consultants early on to start to develop different financing scenarios, looking at sales of bonds, length of those bond repayment periods, interest rates. And this was information that our consultants developed and provided to all of the public water agencies so that they could then begin to apply those different scenarios to their particular situations and take to their boards as they were describing or providing information on WaterFix and asking the boards to vote on them. So I just wanted to try and close the loop there. We provided information early on. It's with the public water agencies, and we're just waiting for this last piece that will allow us to wrap up very critical tasks in the new year. So in conclusion, WaterFix is an important project to update California's outdated water delivery infrastructure, to address the declining Delta ecosystem needs, and to ensure water reliability for generations of Californians to come. WaterFix is a product of more than a decade of review, planning, rigorous scientific and environmental analyses, and unprecedented public comment and stakeholder engagement. And just some stats on that. In all, since 2008, there have been over 600 briefings, public meetings, and working group meetings dedicated to the discussion of WaterFix and helping the project evolve as it's moved along. The department received the department and the Bureau of Reclamation together received about 31,000 comments alone on the draft EIR, EIS, and the recirculated draft documents. And these have been responded to, and again, they have helped us shape the project as we've moved forward. Ultimately, the scope of the project will hinge on our partnership with local water agencies and their desire to participate in the project. This information has become available this year as they've been meeting, and sorry, repeating again, but we will finalize that in the new year. And currently, the state continues to advance the project as currently configured, but we understand that as we move through these final decisions and analyses, we will be looking to any changes we might need to make to optimize the project. And with that, I'm going to end and say thank you, and of course, would like to address any questions.
Great. Can I do one quick?
So did you have any additional comments that you'd like to make?
No, I just wanted to offer that if you have comments that maybe go beyond the elements related to the audit, that I'm happy to give a perspective or update you on the current regulatory processes. So
Okay.
just offer that as well.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and proceed with questions from the panel. Senator Dodd?
Yeah, Ms. Messer, thank you for your testimony. I understand that the financial and economic analysis you're waiting for water agencies, but you seem to be, in your comments, you seem to be very positive on what the water agencies are thinking about this project. That was at least my take on what you said, but that flies in the face of news reports and articles that I've heard from big agencies that are saying no to this. And so, I mean, I just need you to respond to that, because it just flies in the face of, you know, saying one thing and not acknowledging what's going on around.
Okay, yep, absolutely. So in my remarks, what I was alluding to is that there have been 10 state water project contractors that have taken this to their boards for a vote, and all of them have voted yes to participate in Cal WaterFix. So Metropolitan, I apologize, I don't have the list in front of me, but Kern, Zone 7, Santa Clara, I know it's conditional, but still a yes vote. There's more information that they need to wrestle through, and then a whole host of remaining state water contractors that have voted yes to participate. So that's perhaps the positive note, is that we are seeing that. I think, without assuming too much, but recognizing that Westland's water district voted no on participation in the Cal WaterFix, and I know that was most definitely in the news. I will say that if you look at the final resolution of that meeting, while the vote was no, there is still room in there for continued dialogue, pending some additional information that their staff need to work through and provide. So we are at the ready to continue dialogue with them when they are in a place to do that.
What is the timetable for hearing from everybody? Do you have a drop dead date on that?
I do not. We have been obviously closely watching, and we are thinking by the first quarter of 2018 they will be done with whatever remaining board meetings they need to have.
So we can assume that this financial and economic analysis is going to be out by no later than the second quarter of 2018. Is that correct?
I think we could commit to that, yes.
No.
No. Senator Glazier, and then Assemblymember McCory.
Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Absolutely.
And obviously, I'm sure we're all in agreement that this project has enormous consequences to California. What's the role that the legislature should be playing in such a significant project such as this?
Great question. Well, I know we have the recommendation from the state audit to have, I suppose, what you would call more regular dialogue and reporting to the legislature on these types of projects. But this one, and we are not taking a stance on that. Obviously, we will do whatever, we are required to do and whatever is appropriate. With this particular project, I, would offer that this is a good venue to do some touch points on very key issues and items. I haven't myself been part of a dialogue on this project yet, not this extensive. I think this is a very good way to start. I don't know, Ken, if you have any other thoughts. I mean,
Well, let me maybe
Yeah.
pose the question again in a different way. Irrespective of where the money is coming from, this is potentially a multi-billion-dollar project that's going to affect millions of people in our state, and with enormous impacts on important industries affecting our state. Where's the legislative role in deciding whether this is a good thing to go forward with? Because everything that I have heard about it is that it's the actions that have taken place are an attempt to circumvent the legislative process rather than to have us be full participants.
So I'll ask everybody to keep their clapping to a minimum, please, so we can get through this.
Well, part of what I'm thinking is there needs to be more information exchange with legislators, especially throughout the state. And part of that would be providing status on where we're at, providing the information behind decisions, the science. I think that because there are ramifications, I want to say positive, others are going to say negative, but really we need to think about this statewide. I would want to have that kind of dialogue with the right representatives for their communities so that we could bring to them the information that says, what are the impacts in this particular area of the state? How are we thinking about this? I feel often that the project, we're so immersed in it, and we're thinking very, at least for the department, thinking about the state water project, thinking about how that whole process moves forward with this, the benefits to keeping that reliability, but recognizing there are other elements out there that we could be engaging with the legislature on.
Thank you, and I appreciate the interest in having us provide some level of oversight into the work that you're doing, but the fundamental question still remains. We're an equal branch of government. We're all elected by the people to represent them, that we debate oftentimes major policy issues and minor policy issues affecting our wonderful state, and this certainly seems to be one of the most major. And I still fail to see why the administration is circumventing the legislative process as we engage in on everything else, from the state budget on down. Is that why isn't the administration allowing us to represent our communities in the choices that are being made here, rather than something that simply is oversight over how you spend your money and who you hire and the rest?
And I can't hope to speak on behalf of the entire administration on this. But I will say, sorry, lost my train of thought there, because it's a good question, but
It's above your pay grade.
yes, it is.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to answer Senator Glazer's question, is because of projects like the high-speed rail project as well, and they're probably not optimistic about the answer they'll receive from us, which is even more reason why we should have. I know the public wishes they would have the opportunity to weigh in, but at the minimum, they should have who they send to Sacramento to weigh in as their representatives, and so that's also my continued position. I have a question for you, and I know we're going to get to the economics next, and I don't see you coming up after, and so it's kind of hard asking you earlier, but you know some of the issues that they're going to say about the cost-benefit analysis from the economic research from the UOP down the road here. And so can you just maybe briefly comment on your response on the criticisms of the financial feasibility of this for either the 2 tunnels or even the 1 tunnel, and the argument that it falls over with its own weight, and why you think that is not accurate from your perspective?
Sure. So Ken Bogdan, I'm Senior Counsel with the Department of Water Resources. We've seen an analysis that was submitted related to this from Jeffrey Michaels. We're not economists, so I apologize. We didn't bring one to directly respond to the assumptions that were made related to the report. We are finalizing the analysis that both from an economic analysis and the financial analysis, and would be happy to submit at a later date a specific response related to the components of the report. There certainly are certain assumptions you need to make when you don't have all the information related to the participants for the state water contractors, as well as some of the interested CVP contractors in participating in WaterFix. And so we appreciate that there are some gross assumptions that need to be made by others who don't yet have that information, whether it's Jeffrey Michaels or whether it's the Brattle Group or the PFM folks that are working on finalizing the economic analysis. So I can't speak to the specifics of some of the assumptions and conclusions that Jeffrey Michaels made, but we're happy to, when these reports are finalized, to also provide specific responses related to those issues.
And we can bring our economist with us next time.
Okay, thank you. So recent comments from the Trump administration signal that the federal government will not financially participate in this project. What expectation of federal participation is included in the financing plan, and how will the loss of funding be addressed also when we talk about Westland, Santa Clara, and possibly others when you do the financial analysis or the cost benefit to these districts? What's plan B?
So there had always been an assumption this may be a state-only project. That was the plan B. So that is in part what we are moving forward. We have a handle, and we'll have a complete handle on the state participation in the early part of next year. We continue, as I mentioned, and the door is open to continue our dialogue with potential federal participants of this project. Yes, we recognize that from Department of Interior that in reclamation will not be paying for construction or some of these upfront costs. We know the authority issue lies there for them. So right now we are focused and have been on the state participation, and we'll continue our dialogue with the federal folks as we can.
So I think one of the things that remains kind of, like when I got here today, it was foggy. And this project seems like it's been in the fog, for the legislature. One of the things that, now with the outcome of the Orville Dam, where you partner with the state water contractors, and the glaringly mismanagement of protecting that infrastructure going forward, how do we know that these state water contractors are a good partner that will stand up and do their due diligence? I mean, we've already have this record with Orville, that we were told it was going to be a couple $100 million, and now we're hearing, or $300 million, and now it's $600 million to fix what was done wrong in the first place and not maintained. So the credibility is starting to wane going forward. And so, we're all members of this caucus, but also representing people that we feel that might have to be the backdrop or the saviors of this project through taxpayer resources because of agencies that are run by boards and later on and might opt out of this process and put the burden on others. It just seems like that you've moved this project ahead not knowing if it's affordable. Spent tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And what happens if it's not? So it's like, to me, it's like damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. It is what it is. We have an objective, and it's going to be what it's going to be. And that's not okay. And so that's the perception that the public has. That's what's represented to me out in my district. And again, the indifference of the agency of the impact to farming and the salinity levels coming up into the delta, because you are taking a significant amount of water out of the central delta and moving it to the southern delta. It remains a question of, is it okay to incentivize 2/3 of the economy and damage 1/3 of the economy with this project and disregard any of our concerns? Because we've been very vocal in saying there's got to be another way. There's got to be another way. And it just seems like, again, this focus of moving forward, no matter what the cost, is unacceptable. And and we go forward and saying, what we're trying to do, I don't discount that Southern California needs this water. I do not. Absolutely want to be helpful. This is why we were supportive of the water bond, to move it forward, to actually be instrumental in providing storage and water utilized in a smart fashion. But as I've said before, California does not do mega projects well. Okay? And so when we see this, and we see that the auditor's report about having utilized funds in this manner, going way over guesstimates, not estimates, guesstimates on cost, we look and say, how can we trust you? How can we trust you? And again, it's been this pattern. And so this is why I can't thank the State Auditor's Office enough, because again, you don't have a general oversight. You've just had an open checkbook. And I know that there's been different directors. There's always an inconsistency in state agencies with the director. And so that, I guess what I'm saying is, at some point in time, they get to do this. They did that, okay? And we need to be able to be credible to the people that we represent and get them the best value for the projects. But this just doesn't make sense. I'm a general contractor, and I have never started a project not knowing what it would cost. So my hat's off to you for being able to do so, but that's our job, is to make sure that we rein in that process. And so I'm hoping that we can come together, and I know that you're directed by the administration. I get that. Honestly, I do. And Metropolitan is a big part of this drive, but they don't live here. They don't live here. And so we need to understand that that we need to rein this in and say we made a mistake, if that's a possibility going forward. Because I'm not seeing anything that says, if this thing doesn't measure up in the cost-benefit analysis or the financial analysis that goes forward, here's our plan B. You don't have a plan B. You're not telling us that you have a plan B. And so I'm looking forward to that process also, because right now, my whole focus is, if it doesn't measure up, we spent a whole lot of money accomplishing nothing. So, give me some hope.
All right, can I?
Please.
Okay, just a couple comments in response to. No, I absolutely appreciate it. So I think perhaps I didn't do a good job kind of painting sort of what to expect as the public water agencies, who are the beneficiaries, and it's a beneficiaries pays setup for this project, as they make their final decisions, then we know financially where we sit. And I mentioned just at the very end of my remarks that knowing that we may need to look at changes in the project moving ahead, because that's the whole who's in, how much, and what does the project look like as a result of that. But again, looking at how this project, how we can maximize the benefits that the project does bring in terms of reliability, in terms of what I believe, and I know others may not agree, but you know, I was an environmental scientist once upon a time coming up through the ranks, and I see that this can have benefits for the ecosystem. The way we're doing it right now isn't working. This provides us some flexibility to hopefully turn that around. So that's part of my opinion on the project moving forward. So I think there are those benefits, but we have to look at, moving ahead, if there are any changes that need to be made to the scope of it, do we still get that? And that's part of what we will look at, obviously, in the economic analyses and other analyses, is those benefits. There was something else I wanted to say. I am so sorry. I keep losing my train of thought here, but if it's okay, I just wanted to clarify one thing on the Oroville piece, because that's partially the other hat I wear. Yes, the price of the recovery and the repairs, the recovery phase has gone up. Part of the problem there was when we went out for bid very early on after the incident happened, we were at maybe a 30% design at that point. So we knew we had to come up with a dollar estimate, but that we had a lot more of the design and construction details to work out. Those have been worked out, obviously, for this year and looking into next year. So yes, the price tag did rise up, but we had only a certain amount of information to work with right around February when we were putting the contract out for bid. So I just wanted to recognize that.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I would rather under-promise and over-deliver than tell the legislature that it's going to be this, and then all of a sudden it just doesn't look good when we're putting the numbers out.
Yes.
But on that note, I've also gotten reports of and we'll deal till this in another possibility, but of reports of inspections on dams throughout California and recommendations, and the recommendations hadn't been followed, so we need to follow back up on that too. But it just seems like there's a pattern that there's no continual oversight that is glaringly needed, that we can do that. And I don't fault you. I know you've been with the agency for a while, but you're in a different capacity now. But I think it's our jobs to finally rein this in with some kind of a peer review committee or some kind of continual process that makes it a partnership versus an adversarial position, agency versus legislature kind of deal, So I'm looking forward to working towards that. It's imperative that we do, or this is going to end up bad. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to look forward to moving that forward. But I do appreciate you being here, as you've been at a lot of the meetings, and you probably know a lot of these people by name.
I do.
And
yeah.
So I appreciate
it's good to
you.
see him.
Yeah. So thank you for being here.
All right.
Today.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to our third panel, our presenter, and that's Dr. Jeffrey Michael. He's the director of the Center of Business and Policy Research at the University of the Pacific. And I'll emphasize that he is a doctor with a doctorate. So anyway, which means it gives a lot of credibility to me. Thank you, Dr. Michael. Please proceed.
Yeah. Well, as my wife once said, I'm married to a doctor, but not the good kind. That can, that can heal you and earns high salaries. But thank you for that introduction. I have a PowerPoint. I'm not going to go through all of it today. There's a lot of words on it. It's here for notes for you to bring home. I'm not, in particular, not going to really talk much about the alternatives piece other than just a few comments about the one tunnel discussion that's out there right now. I know there's others here that can discuss that. I do want to thank the auditor's report for citing the benefit costs and financial feasibility issues and explaining a little bit about what that is. I really appreciate that, as well as documenting the response of the Department of Water Resources of why they haven't completed those analysis, which Ms. Messer just reiterated here. I'll point out that there are two different pieces of this analysis: benefit costs and financial feasibility. As the auditors pointed out, the benefit cost has nothing to do with how it's paid for, the financing. And so the explanation for the Department of Water Resources that we can't do this analysis till we know exactly how much people are going to contribute is simply incorrect when it comes to benefit cost analysis. It's not consistent with their guidelines or the professional approach to that. That analysis normally would be complete at this point and provide insight on it. I'm going to provide some results from my analysis of it and insights that can be gained from it. On the financial feasibility part, it's also common practice for that to be done in feasibility studies in a draft process with the engineering studies as that goes forward. You'll find that sort of analysis for other projects that Reclamation and DWR do. All the major reservoirs that they're pursuing have at least one draft that includes financial feasibility and cost allocation. And that's really valuable analysis because as they've expressed in the environmental analysis, you get feedback from it, you get understanding that allows you to make adjustments to the project. Now, while they've gotten lots of feedback on the environmental analysis and made adjustments, they haven't received the proper feedback on financial analysis, and they've got themselves into a problem now as a result. I'll point out that the first benefit cost paper that we put forward in this is in 2012, and that the calls for benefit cost analysis actually go back years before that from various independent agencies and scientific agencies. It came from a review panel from the Independent Science Board. It came from calls from National Review in 2010. It came from the legislature and proposed bills in early 2012. And you know, these calls were ignored. In 2012, eventually there was a contract for an economic benefits analysis with the Brattle Group. It wasn't a benefits cost analysis. It was a give me the good news, benefits analysis. That was useful. It provided useful information that I've incorporated into these benefit cost analysis, but it doesn't give that full comprehensive look. The report we put out in 2012, based on the information in the preliminary Bay Delta Conservation Plan, where we basically pulled the tunnels out of the bigger conservation plan and did a focused analysis on it. Initial analysis found 40 cents in benefits for each dollar of costs. We also had some findings related to the financing of it, and so I'm not going to, I pulled a quote from the 2012 paper, and this is the sort of thing that you would learn from feasibility studies in 2012. DWR approached it properly, but our analysis showed that financing the tunnels will require a subsidy from, for agricultural users from urban ratepayers or taxpayers, or, and I would switch that to an and today, significant sales of water from agricultural to urban water agencies. But in the public comments on this, urban agencies and the government are adamant that there will be no ratepayer or taxpayer subsidies for farmers, and farmers insist they have no intention of selling their water. The analysis, I mean, if you did the financial analysis in 2012, all the problems that are in the news today were completely foreseeable. And it should have been, could have been working on these a long time ago and should have been. Key assumptions, I will talk a little bit about, while the analysis isn't complete, we've seen staff analysis from water agencies leading up to the vote. We've seen drafts and bits come out from DWR's consultants. So I will be able to talk a little bit about some of the assumptions. But in a normal feasibility study, it's integrated with the environmental work, and it follows the same assumptions of the EIR. And that's what I've done in these particular projects, is followed, use the information in the EIR, use other information that's come primarily from the departments and their consultants, and to lay it out. And one of the benefits of benefit cost analysis, we can disagree about assumptions, but it forces you to show your work. And so that we can see, if you come to a different conclusion, why. Is it because you're valuing something different? Are you making a different assumption? And from both the work that I've done and relying heavily upon their consultants, there are a few things that came out of this 2012 analysis that should have informed the planning process but did not. The first is that these three main categories of benefits: additional water supply to the south of Delta agencies, improved water quality to those agencies, and as well and risk reduction from an earthquake flood scenario. These are the sort of the three things that have been put out there. The values on the water quality are to some extent offset by harm to water quality in other areas, and so it's not a major factor in the benefit cost analysis. The other finding is that the earthquake risk reduction benefit, what comes out of these analyses, is that this is really a lousy way to mitigate the risk of flood or earthquake in the Delta. The benefits are not sufficient for $16 billion, and most of the costs from that scenario aren't even addressed by a tunnel. They are other community and infrastructure costs. And that means that basically, on the benefit cost analysis, really, the other pieces are benefits, but they're relatively small. It hinges on the export water quality assumption. And so, I've been at events and where I've got to sit on stage and talk with consulting economists. And basically, if we come to different conclusions, it's all about the export water supply assumptions primarily. I follow the EIR, and they don't. But I also point out that because I've followed a lot of their analysis, my base scenario, it's not set up to be biased against the tunnel, includes a lot of pro-tunnel biases in it. People were concerned about cost escalation. I take the cost estimates at face value, not putting any sort of risk factor in there for cost escalation. Some areas that are hard to value potential social costs aren't in it. Assumes no environmental costs, which is highly questionable. Assumes over the next 100 years that our water technology and alternatives are fixed the way they are several years ago, which is a pretty pessimistic assumption. And we're using low discount rates. So there's plenty of things if I wanted to tilt it against the tunnels, there's lots of things that we could have done, but it's just simply unnecessary. But the conclusion of benefit cost analysis, we hear about how terrible the status quo is, but when you get benefit cost ratios of 23 cents to 39 cents on the dollar, what that's telling you is that your solution is worse than the status quo. Your solution is more costly than the costs of the problem. And that's obviously an issue. You can also look at it and understand, how much of a change to the benefits and costs would be required in order to get us to a more positive result. And that gives you some insight into whether, is this a bad idea or is this something that we can, tweak and adjust to get to a better outcome. Sort of my analysis of what would be necessary to get that ratio to break even is that the cost of the project would have to be $2 billion or under, not $16 billion or under. So that's acknowledging, I know most of the people in this community would oppose tunnels if they cost $1 billion. But if the cost was that low, the benefits, then you could make a valid statewide argument that this is in the public interest. Alternatively, if you're going to spend this money on a water project, you would need a much higher water yield, or the water exports that are delivered with and without the project. But that would need to get to about 2 million acre feet per year on average to justify a $16-17 billion water infrastructure project. And there's no, physically that might be possible, but there's no way to accomplish that within and get an environmental permit. The feasibility analysis, these are the components of a feasibility analysis. That's just a big quote from DWR's guidelines. I agree with them. But he said this analysis could be done in draft form. It's typically done so. We worked through, put some scenarios out there of how something might be financed and how costs might be allocated, and adjust that iteratively as you go through the planning process. Not having proper financial feasibility and not having strong financing in place produces a lot of risks to the public. Most notably to state general fund ratepayers, who has to step into the gap when a project has inadequate financing. Will they be diverted from other environmental programs? Will the mitigation action, will those various promises be funded and take place? And in this particular context, there's a huge environmental risk because the project is proposing a $16 billion tunnels and is proposing using them in a way that doesn't fully utilize their capacity to expand water supply because of sort of rules and laws. And that creates a problem because when you have debt service needs at over $1 billion a year, it becomes very difficult to enforce those rules and regulations in the future. And a lot of these, through the process, a lot of these decisions have been punted to the future, such as biological opinions that don't cover construction but not all the operations and say we'll reconsult later after you've incurred billions of dollars of costs. That's problematic. In terms of, this is probably the graph that you should take home and understand if I was going to, that explains basically the difference, one of the key differences between my analysis and what has been presented to these water agencies by their staff and some of the economists. And this is a graph that just shows the cost per acre foot for the incremental water supply that might be a result from putting these tunnels in place. And that's along the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis is just that cost per acre foot. Now, the final environmental impact report said compared to doing nothing, on average, we'll get 172,000 additional acre feet of water by instituting the tunnels compared to no action. So that's the far left, the box where I have the EIR. If you look at this with the EIR no action baseline, that puts the cost of incremental water in excess of $6,000 an acre foot. This is multiples over the cost of desalination. It's just plainly unviable, and that's why you see our benefit cost ratios so poor. Staff analysis from the Metropolitan Water District and some things that we've seen from the consultants differ from the environmental documents and have a with and without tunnel yield of 1.3 million acre feet, which is a lot more. That brings the cost down per acre foot down in the $1,000 range. The top horizontal line is a kind of an average cost of urban alternatives. You get something into the $1,000 or so range. Generally, that's a project urban agencies can take forward. I've looked at a lot of analysis on the agricultural piece, and the highest value I've ever seen for agricultural water is actually coming out of the California Water Commission now, related to Prop 1 funding, where they've try to estimate the scarcity that will exist when we implement the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and that will raise the value of water in agriculture. That got up to about $600 an acre foot. So even under these optimistic assumptions, that gets the cost per, or under these assumptions, gets the cost per acre foot under the urban threshold, but doesn't achieve it for the agricultural threshold. The problem is that the vast majority of water that's exported to the Delta goes to agricultural uses, not urban. And that's what creates this problem with cost allocation and financial feasibility, which requires benefits over cost for every participant. And that drove some of these votes that we saw recently with Westlands and Reclamation, which are almost entirely agricultural serving, basically not funding it when it's been assumed to be a 45% share. This partial and conditional funding that we've received from other agencies. Metropolitan approved a 26% share, but it was based on this sort of analysis, not based on analysis that's consistent with the EIR and the other documents that have been produced. So this has created this problem that's been known for a long time, in which we haven't seen the solution yet. People are talking about one tunnel, but just a few, these are sort of, this is my reaction to the one tunnel proposal. It lowers the costs, but not enough to, we don't even have a cost proposal on it, but there's no prospect of it reducing costs enough, in my view, for it to generate a supportable benefit cost ratio. And it doesn't really solve this urban agricultural cost allocation problem, because it doesn't get the unit costs to a place to pull the agricultural agencies back in. And so this idea of sort of moving forward as an urban-only project and not an agricultural project, I'm really interested in seeing analysis of how that's going to work, because it would be extremely difficult. It's setting up the idea that we're supposed to reduce conflict in the future. You're creating major conflict in the future between the participants and the non-participants, and how much water they should receive from the Delta, and how much water is attributable to the WaterFix versus without. It's like opening up another large battlefield in this already contentious area. So I just don't see how one tunnel is going to solve the problem. There's a lot of better alternatives that are out there. I'm not going to give a lecture on those. Without endorsement, I will mention, though, I mean, if you want to reduce the cost and by eliminating a tunnel and having one tunnel, you know, an alternative to that would be to move the intakes, and so that rather than half the number of tunnels, you could have half the length of tunnels. And certainly people have talked about West Delta alternatives that could reduce a lot of conflict and reduce costs. And I'm not endorsing those. I'm not sure that those would be feasible, but I think that would be a rational thing for the agency to be devoting resources to serious feasibility studies for those types of alternatives. So with that, thank you very much.
So any of the members of the panel have questions of the doctor? I do. Just so do you find it unusual that a large project, and this is kind of like Captain Obvious, do you find this unusual that a large project that the administration claims is a critical statewide importance has not developed or released the economic or financial analysis at this project timeline?
Yeah, I think it's unusual, and it's just bad policy. I mean, when you have when you're talking about the most expensive water infrastructure project the state's ever proposed, the most controversial, and one that clearly has negative impacts in some parts of the state and positive impacts in other parts of the state, that's exactly the time when the benefit cost analysis is most important to the policy process in order to allow people to make good decisions. And so, it's not only unusual, but quite unfortunate that that's not been a higher priority.
Thank you. You want to ask? Go ahead.
Doctor, thank you very much for your informative presentation. And I appreciate the fact that you're focused on facts and data and hard numbers, which is an important part of the choices that we make. For those who are not familiar with you and your work, could you just share, has anybody funded your work in this regard that you put together today?
The first 2012 version I just did as a professorial project. The second one, Delta Counties Coalition did provide $10,000 of funding for that. But having said that, I mean, I've done other projects for Delta Protection Commission and other agencies through the years. So yeah, I've received a good amount of local funding.
I just wanted to make sure you were given that opportunity to explain, you know,
Sure.
why if someone, the skeptic out there who feels your work was tainted by funding, that you have that opportunity to at least provide that clarity. And as you indicated, you've done work on this before. You were contracted to do the enhanced slides that we've seen today. Is that right?
No, not
Okay.
these slides. But I do have a contract with the Delta Counties Coalition at the moment. It wasn't for this specifically, but yeah, I've received plenty of funding from interests that are opposed to the project.
And have you, the analysis that you provided today, has that just been developed just for today?
No.
Okay. And have you received any criticism from others, from whatever point of view, about the validity of the numbers that you've provided?
Yeah, I mean, there's some criticism that says, you know, you've received contracts from opponents, so you're, you know, as you mentioned.
But I'm talking about the facts that you presented and the cost-benefit analysis, the assumptions that you've made.
I haven't received a formal sort of review, but I have appeared on panels with the state's consultants, and we've discussed things. They're actually quite informative. Actually, you put us up there together, and we can focus on the you know, on the assumptions, and I think that's quite helpful. So I actually regret that they're not here today, so that we can't have that dialogue.
And I want to just say that I so appreciate your work, and if there are critics out there who think that there's assumptions that are not right or numbers that are different, that I know I would, and I assume everybody here would welcome that transparency and that disclosure on all sides, so that we can make good judgments based on facts. And I thank you very much for the thoughtfulness that you've put into your work you presented. Thank you.
Any other questions of the panel? Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. So what we're going to do is move on to the supervisors that are here. We're going to go into public comment, but we're going to start with the supervisors. And I know we'll go in order there. Don Natoli, Supervisor Natoli, come on, step up. And the other supervisors will be ready to move into the next one in line. We'll move forward. Please announce yourself and who you represent, and thank you for being here.
Yes, Assemblymember Frazier and Senator Dodd and your colleagues. I'm Supervisor Don Natoli. I represent the 5th District in Sacramento County, and which includes the place we're here today, right here in Walnut Grove. And I want to first extend a thank you to each of you and your colleagues for having this hearing right here in Walnut Grove in the heart of the Delta. On behalf of the Delta Counties Coalition, the counties of Sacramento, San Joaquin, Contra Costa, Solano, and Yolo, we've come together to, over the course of nearly a decade, if not longer now, to attempt to provide a strong voice for our Delta constituents. But being here at ground zero for a lot of what's proposed in the California WaterFix, I think is very important. As you see the audience here today, folks who come from a variety of backgrounds, some of them multi-generational in the Delta, farmers, agricultural support groups, small business people, recreationists, people who have made their lives and appreciate, live, work, and reside, and certainly are very concerned about what's proposed in the California WaterFix. And this hearing is very important, I think, to bring focus to financial feasibility but certainly to the aspects of the project. And I would, I guess, be remiss if I didn't remind folks, all of us, but certainly to call attention to that when the legislature enacted the Delta Reform Act in 2009, that it called for achieving the co-equal goals of water supply reliability and ecosystem restoration. But there was a very, very important qualifier, and it represents the interests of the folks in the Delta, and that is that those goals will be achieved in a manner which protects and enhances the unique cultural, agricultural, historical, and natural resource values of the Delta as an evolving place. I don't want folks to forget that, because that reflects on the people in this room and many thousands, tens of thousands of others who call the Delta their home. And so on behalf of my colleagues, who you're going to hear from in just a moment, that I know we have a very limited amount of time, I want to just point out, in addition to that, that we, as a coalition, on behalf of the constituencies we represent, and certainly we appreciate the Delta Caucus and all of you for your efforts, have worked to not only bring a voice, but to advocate for reasoned approach to water policy and water management in the state of California. We recognize the importance of the Delta, certainly as providing the conduit for moving water from the Sierras, certainly to other parts of the state who depend upon it. But we don't want to see the Delta sacrificed as a part of this project or any other project, and we appreciate the oversight that this committee is offering. I want to just note, too, that I find not surprising, but certainly troubling and very compelling some of the testimony that we heard here today from the Auditor's Office, as you pointed out, Assemblymember Frazier, but also certainly from Dr. Michael, who has done a very thorough analysis over the course of many years on the impacts and the financial feasibility of this project. So before I turn to my colleagues, I just want to note that we do believe that there are alternatives that will provide this state with the reliability that people need to have to conduct their business and certainly to have their communities thrive and prosper. But we do not want to see the Delta sacrificed as a part of that. And I would just note, too, that people talk about $16 billion, and you hear numbers of $280 million and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. They're mind-boggling numbers, but I, for one, do not believe for 1 second that this project, if it goes forward, is going to be $16 billion. It will be many, many billions of dollars, and yet the destruction and devastation to these communities in the Delta will be everlasting. And so I would just encourage this panel to continue your good work, to advocate on behalf of the people of the state of California, to have oversight and to hold folks accountable as it relates to this project. So with that being said, I would want to turn over to my colleague, Supervisor Miller from San Joaquin County, who will offer some testimony on alternatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don, and I want to thank the Delta Caucus for having us here today. We appreciate the time. California's recent flooding following a multi-year drought certainly highlight the need for us to secure our water future with smart investments. This winter, we experienced a series of atmospheric rivers that just brought an incredible amount of rain to our state, rain that we were not prepared to effectively accommodate. At one point, it was estimated that over 1 million gallons of water per second were flowing through our rivers and creeks through the Delta, out under the Golden Gate Bridge and into the ocean. It is possible to capture and store and effectively use a percentage of that water safely without damage to the environment. Why weren't we prepared to do that? Because our state has been focused on directing its energies and its resources on WaterFix, a plan that will not increase our water supply, will devastate the environment of the Delta, and is just not good policy for our state. In addition to that, we are tasked with addressing climate change and sea level rise in this state in a meaningful way, something that WaterFix does not adequately address. And we are also charged with reducing reliance on the Delta as a water supply. This project not only does not reduce reliance on the Delta, it perpetuates reliance on the Delta in a really unhealthy way for our state. There are, however, alternatives out there that will address these issues, will increase our water supply at a fraction of the cost of this single project. It is our job to make sure that we make smart investments of taxpayer dollars with a high return on those investments in a way that will actually increase our water supply, manage our water more efficiently, supply local jobs that are long-lasting, and provide for local control over the management of those projects. What we say yes to, the Delta counties, are investing in statewide and regional water storage, both above and below ground, upgrades to our current infrastructure, levee system improvements, which actually will provide for reliability of our water supply, conservation, water use efficiency, and environmental restoration. We've brought today a matrix that is only a very partial listing of some of these regional projects that are in various stages of progress throughout our state. We're going to leave that information with you today. We appreciate you taking the time to hear from us. Thank you.
Okay. Greetings. Thank you for putting this caucus together. Great idea. The Delta County Coalition has worked together for many years on behalf of the Delta to protect it and to get together on the tunnel issues. My kids tell me I'm old, but what I understand is that this idea of the peripheral canal or the tunnels or the California WaterFix started 15 to 20 years before I was even born. And when you think about it, California being a leader in technology and in being environmentally thoughtful, it seems pretty silly that we're still looking at an idea that is that old. We can do better. We have ideas that are going to create more local jobs, that when we spend our money locally, we can actually capture and create more water, not just send it somewhere. Our neighbors down in San Diego have a desalination project that yields 112,000 acre feet and costs $2 billion. Los Angeles County has a water recycling project that yields 171,000 acre feet and costs $95 million. Los Vaqueros is currently expanding as a reservoir from 160,000 to 275,000 acre feet for $450 million. That creates local jobs, it creates water, and it's protecting our environment. We can do better. As we look at sea level rise and we look at growth and all of the other things, we need to spend our money locally and be looking at what we can do to create water locally instead of just doing a conveyance down to Southern California. The next speaker is Skip Thompson.
Well, thank you, colleagues, and I believe you've heard from a group that's been fighting this project for over 10 years. On behalf of the Delta County Coalition, I'd like to thank Assemblymember Frazier and Senator Dodd for putting on the town hall and allowing the Delta County and those that are going to be most affected by this project to participate and have their voices heard, something that we as members of the Delta County Coalition have not been able to do. I'd just like to take a moment to respond to some of the comments that I heard this morning. Ms. Messer indicated that there would be a vote taken, and it's surprising that a vote would be taken before a cost benefit or financial analysis would be made. To the Assembly members' comments, you don't start a project until you know what it's going to cost. And a California-only project is the way Ms. Messer indicated this project would be seen. We at the Delta Counties Coalition kept hearing that the project would rely on somewhere between $4 and $6 billion of federal aid to make this thing work. It's very surprising now that it's going to be a California only. And then, you know, to the issue of transparency and allowing those of us that are going to be most affected by the project, I think it's interesting that Dr. Michaels has had his benefit cost analysis out there for many years. So anybody can take their shots at them. They haven't done it. Why? Because we're quite credible. But it took a Public Record Act request to get the feasibility or financial data that the state had. So if we're going to play fairly, we ought to be looking at getting our numbers on the table and let that dictate whether or not this is a good project. And the county's coalition would have two asks from your group, Assemblymember Frazier, to remain vigilant, which I know you will, and another ask is to make sure that a tape of this town hall meeting is shared with your colleagues in the Senate and the Assembly. We, as my colleagues and I, have gone about the state talking about why we think the project is not the best for California, not just the Delta. It's been well received. And so I think, So once your colleagues in the Senate or the Assembly are also given the information, they too will find it quite interesting. And so I guess I would just finally reiterate that I want to thank the group for having the town hall meeting and appreciate everyone that's in the audience, because this is an issue that's going to affect our state for many, many generations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor. So with that, we're going to take a couple seconds here and get the mic set up in the middle. I would ask that you get in line so that we can be prompt of if you have public comments. And I have my official timekeeper here. So we'll try to keep the comments to 2 minutes, please, and respect others. So we have a long process of, looks like several speakers. So what I'll ask is everybody respect the speakers, and we'll quiet down now, please. Okay, so we're going to move forward with our first speaker. Please identify yourself and who you represent, please.
Yeah, I'm R.V. Chavold. I'm from Santa Barbara. I'm representing the California Water Impact Network. We are involved in water matters throughout the state. You may wonder why a person from Santa Barbara is interested in what's going on here. We've done a study which we call the unaffordable and destructive twin tunnels, why the Santa Barbara experience matters. And the gist of this is that we have already suffered the consequences of projects that are too expensive. We hooked up to state water in 1991, or voted to, and as a consequence of where we are, our pipeline was much more expensive than, say, the pipeline that goes to LA, or the aqueduct. And we had to build a local aqueduct. And consequently, we have huge costs, fixed costs that have been passed on to the water districts that have signed up for this. So much so that they've raised water rates sky high to where the extent they can no longer collect enough revenue to service the debt unless they raise rates higher. And they have finally reached equilibrium. And the water districts there now charge rates that are probably higher than anywhere in California. The most important part, just for the state water, we found, like in one water district, 46% of their budget is just to service the debt costs of the state water project. And the other part of the deal is that the project delivers very little water to us when we need it. And so it's really been destructive to us. Then we went on and analyzed what would be the effect of adding the twin tunnels, especially with the CVP sort of opting out. And the consequences are very serious. In the Santa Maria City
I'm going to ask you
Water
to wrap
District,
up, sir.
yeah, 67% of their budget would have to be dedicated to serving fixed costs of both state water and the twin tunnels if it went through. And so we consider Santa Barbara the poster boy for what will happen to water districts up and down the state if this project goes through. And Westlands, of course, has recognized that. And I think I brought up a report, copies of the report, and I think you all have them. I hope some of the others got them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please state your name, who you represent. You have 2 minutes, please.
Melinda Terry, Delta resident. That's going to keep it short so I can talk. I did want to thank the Delta legislators for forming the caucus and having this town hall hearing, and for asking for the audit report, because it really was enlightening and a level of transparency that we don't normally see. Things that I would ask you to maybe look towards in the future of having oversight is there's $280 million that was fully expended so far. So my question is, there's dozens of staff at the DHCCP, which is in charge of this project. So who's paying them now? Because there's no new financial agreements from what I could read that have been signed. So I can't figure out where that money's coming from. And then there's $280 million has been spent to get it to a 10 to 20% level of design. So that's still considered conceptual, and you heard the cost overruns at Oroville is because they were only at 30%. So if it costs $280 million to get you to a 10% level of design, is it another $800 million to get you to 100%? I mean, that's some of the questions as I was reading the auditor's report that kind of came to my mind. I also didn't hear anything from the department in their response that there's an intent to actually hire somebody that has the licenses that are required under law and replace the individual program manager that doesn't have those qualifications. I definitely would encourage, I'd like, to follow up on whether they're implementing many of the recommendations regarding keeping the correct documents. On Dr. Michaels, the extra 1.2 million acre feet that Metropolitan talked about when they voted, I guess I would like to know where that water's coming from and how it affects some of us here in the Delta. Also, there was, in the bond that they're proposing, it has $8.8 billion sale is what they're asking for. The $7.2 billion they say will come from other sources, but don't identify those. So those are maybe some areas that it would be nice to have some more oversight and follow up on. Thank you.
Please state your name and who you're representing, please. And
Yes,
2
my
minutes.
name is Russell Ohms. I live in the town of Locke. I'm currently the chairman of the Locke Management Association, a little microdot community. I just wanted to say that generally speaking, if you get someone to ask the wrong question, it doesn't matter what the answer is. So I think this question is absurd. I mean, I'm a human LED light standing here, and we're opposing 10 corporate huge spotlights. And this project is probably the most amazing, huge project hidden in plain sight. My friends from the Bay Area come up and don't even know it's existing, what the tunnels are. What are these tunnels? They see the things. So it's just very difficult to live in an ecosystem that has no rights. I mean, in New Zealand, they made a river a citizen, and it gave it human rights, First Amendment rights to speak. And we sit here with a very quiet Delta. It has only two choices: to live or die, or sustain life or not sustain life. And this project will not sustain life if it goes through. And I wish that we could give a voice to that which was created by whatever the creator is and sustains our life. There are so many solutions, as was brought up by a woman. There's like 8 or 10 simple solutions that don't involve, I call this the nuclear option. When I was young, the old men, because we were only 15 years from ending the war in Japan, nuke them, that'll fix them. And it's funny, the word fix, it's like, the fix is in. It's an interesting word choice, fix. So I don't want to nuke them. I don't want 10 corporations in the south to kill our Delta in the north, to sustain life down there and destroy life up here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Peter Robertson, Recreational Boaters of California. We represent recreational boaters from Chula Vista to the Oregon border. So it's not just a Delta, although I'm a Delta person. We looked at this, and my board is made up of people from Central California, Southern California, Northern California. And we were a little apprehensive about the Southern California folks going, we need water, we want this project. 100% vote, no, we don't want this project, even from the people from Southern California in this context. They're looking for water impoundments, capturing new technology, desalinization, whatever it is, okay, other than this, because they understand what it's going to do to the Delta. It's going to impede the Delta recreational, certainly, commercial, certainly, for years as this thing's being built. I spent a career in construction as a risk manager, so I understand you don't start a job not knowing what it's going to cost. You're going to be out of business. So we came to, how do we really get a phrase right now that fits where we are, and certainly what we heard today and what we've been reading for the last 6 or 7 months. And the only thing that we can come up with for the Department of Water Resources is no confidence. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker, please state your name, who you're representing, and you have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Kyle Jones with Sierra Club, California. I want to thank the caucus for having this meeting down here today. It's always great to be able to travel to the Delta and see its beauty and as a place and not a piece of plumbing. The Sierra Club is committed to attempting to stop and thwart this project wherever possible. We are protesting the application for a change in diversion at the Water Board, and we have sued the Department of Water Resources, alleging that they have violated both CEQA and the Delta Reform Act of 2009. I think they say this every year, but I do believe that 2018 will be a critical year for the project going forward, and as there have been significant funding gaps identified in the project, we are concerned that there's going to be creative thinking coming out of the governor's office with regards to how to try to get this project forward this year. And so we commit to working with this caucus to prevent anything legislatively happening that can help pave the way for this project going forward, and want to make sure that if a new iteration of the project is proposed, that it needs to be compared to developing alternatives in south of the Delta, conservation, recycling, those elements that we know that they need to do in areas to reduce reliance on the Delta and decrease overall exports. Thank you again.
Thank you. Next speakers, please state your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, good morning. Bill Wells, California Delta Chambers and Visitors Bureau. First off, Assemblyman Fraser and Senator Dodd, I want to thank you both for putting this meeting together today. It's excellent and very informative. Anyway, I've been involved in this process since Arnold Schwarzenegger announced his $55 billion plan to divert the Sacramento River around the Delta 10 plus years ago. I spent 2.5 years on the Bay Delta, what we call it the Canal Plan, they call it the Conservation Plan, Public Committee. So I've had, I'd say, extensive experience in this. The one thing that we found consistently is the Department of Water Resources and the Natural Resources Agency never respond to citizen questions and comments, and it's been an ongoing problem for 10 years. I think at this time, it's time to rename the project the California Water Fraud, not the California Water Fix. And as you said earlier, Assemblyman Fraser, the fog out here is ironic because of the whole project is so foggy. But anyway, the project itself, and it's ironic that it's being here in Walnut Grove, because Walnut Grove and Locke and the towns in Cortland and Clarksburg up and down the river are going to be wiped out. I mean, it's going to affect the entire Delta, but for 10 and 11 years, we're going to have pile drivers, barges going up and down the river, muck dumped who knows where. So it's an appalling process, and I think it's time to bring it to an end now. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Move to our next speaker. Please state your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for holding this caucus here today. My name is Matthew Tate. I am currently the Commodore of Sportsman's Yacht Club, located on the San Joaquin River in Antioch. I represent over 500 members of our club, and we are vehemently opposed to this, and we are grateful that some of these numbers are coming out and coming to the light of day. We also agree that there are many other solutions to our California's water issues. In addition, thank you, Commodore Bill, for just mentioning, in addition to being the Commodore of the club, I'm a homeowner here in Walnut Grove. My wife and I purchased our property 15 years ago with the hopes that we can enjoy this beautiful Delta in just a few years when we retire. With this so-called WaterFix, I don't see that happening. Thank you.
Next speaker, state your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Mark Wilson, Wilson Farms and Vineyards, Clarksburg. I go back to the Delta Vision Blue Ribbon Task Force. I was one of the stakeholder advisors, so I've been around for a while in this process. Some of the really sad things I've seen in this is how the Resources Agency and its departments have been politicized during the Schwarzenegger and Brown administrations. The agency is full of PhDs and master's degrees and engineers. They're comfortable, well-paid, and they have no skin in the game. Also, it's become an ossified agency with a bunch of box checkers. What really concerns me is that to see people in the Resources Agency prostituting themselves for this process called BDCP or WaterFix, and it's kind of like the guards at the concentration camp saying, well, I was just following orders. And it really hurts me to see that the Resources Agency and its departments have gone so far downhill in this process. Also, we're starting to see core incompetencies and DWR in particular this year. We see it all through this process called BDCP and WaterFix. I mean, to say that we're going to do a financial analysis after we find out who's going to chip in instead of doing it with what the actual project is, with the actual projected people that are going to be part of that process and doing a financial analysis. Instead, they give them a bucket of information to these different agencies and then say, well, you decide if you want to be in it, and then we'll do a financial analysis. Totally backwards. Another core incompetency we've seen here this year is with Oroville Dam.
Need you to wrap it up.
So anyway, DWR is running that kind of stuff, and it's really hard to as a taxpayer to see this stuff go on. Thank you.
Next speaker, please state your name and who you represent. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Womack. I represent our family farm that's at Clifton Court. We're the only remaining farm that is there. On one side is the SWP, and the other side is the CVP. I've been involved for 50 years, unfortunately, in this project, and I can tell you it's all bad. There is no good. Dealing with DWR, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, or the state water contractors. We spend about $50,000 a year on damages. I'd like to be paid for the damages from the current project. That's not happening. I have to sue the state. I retired as a second grade teacher so I could represent our family because we can't afford lawyers. I don't have an office staff. I do everything myself, and I'm in those WaterFix hearings as much as I can. Unfortunately, my parents are ill. My dad, 85, can't stand the water anymore because he's been so hurt by it over the years. And what I'd like to say is I'd like everybody here to come to the WaterFix meetings, see what they're doing. And I do have a question for the auditor. The $280 million that's been spent, are they accounting for how many million it costs to run the State Water Control Board WaterFix hearings? My gosh, every day I go there it makes me sick because I'm paying for my own parking. Nobody's paying me to be there. And I see all of these people. And so I would like us to question who's paying for the WaterFix hearings. I'd like us to really know what it's costing. It isn't $280 billion, I can assure you that. Thank you so much for your time, and attend WaterFix meetings. Our testimonies are due today, so please be a part of the process.
Appreciate it. Before we move to the next speaker, Senator Dodd has a pressing appointment, so we're going to let him do his close.
Yeah, before this, I had committed to take a boat tour on the Sacramento River to look at the abandoned boat issue and see if we can get anything done in that regard. So I have to leave. But I did want to say that I've been impressed. I've been impressed. Maybe it's obvious to me that I represent a lot of people that are opposed to this project, including 4 out of 5 counties that I represent. I am moved by Dr. Michael's testimony here today. I really think the DWR staff should really look into that. You know, to me, the benefit cost analysis is really key. And you know, the Army Corps of Engineers uses that in terms of how they budget monies to go into projects all across the United States. We had a flood control project in Napa, and at the very beginnings, if they were saying if you didn't have over a 1.5 BC ratio, we won't invest $1 in this thing. And, you know, boy, we moved on that immediately, and we did get there. But to have, what is it, a 0.23 benefit cost ratio on this, what I really want to see is I want to see perhaps even whether it has to be an audit or it can be your department. I want to see a response to that. I think it's very, very important that we're all talking on the same facts, the same figures, the same key metrics going forward. That's one of my takeaways for today. I appreciate everybody's time and attention here, for DWR being here, for Ms. Howell's staff for being here as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
And thanks to Assemblymember Frazier and his staff. Do a great job.
So we'll move next to speakers. State your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Anna Swenson, and I'm with North Delta Cares. I'm also a resident of Clarksburg. And although I've only been there for 4 years, I am very, very emotionally attached to this area. I believe that this area deserves to be protected. Unfortunately, we need to be protected from the very agencies that we pay for. When the Oroville Dam disaster happened, I'm actually originally from Chico, and I watched the whole event unfold on Facebook, and I watched friends and neighbors cry out in fear, worrying about their family members, worrying about whether or not people had gone to safety. I watched as they turned Highway 99, which is normally both north and southbound freeway, into only northbound. And I watched people sit in rescue shelters, hoping that their home will be there when the disaster is over, hoping that their family members are safe, and watching these people's lives basically be unraveled. And the only thought that came to me is, that's exactly what could happen to us. And the response that DWR gave to that disaster is probably the same exact response that we would receive. And I thought about how much I love and care for my friends and my neighbors in this community, and how that would impact us. And already we have the fear and the risk of flood, and DWR is asking us to take on more risk and more fear and we're supposed to be trusting to an agency that apparently hasn't even figured out how to fund a project, let alone how they're going to make sure that we're safe and how they're going to make sure that we're protected. So I very much appreciate you today allowing us to come and speak, and I really, really appreciate you highlighting the issues that we have with the state agency known as DWR.
Thank you. Next speakers, please state your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes.
I'm Glenn Lazoff. I'm a resident of Walnut Grove. When the DWR representative was speaking, one of the things that was skirted over rather quickly was the issue of governance. My understanding is that there will be 2 joint powers authorities, one a public financing authority, another one overseeing the construction. As you know, those are public agencies. They're subject to the Brown Act. They're subject to the Public Records Act. One thing that the legislature could really do that would be helpful would be to stay on top of making sure that our watchdog groups and our citizens groups get access to all the information about the formation, the meetings, the documents that are circulated amongst the staff. Transparency for this whole project has been lax, and if they go the Joint Powers Authority route to fund it, that at least gives us an opening to be able to find out what they're saying to each other and to note the differences between what they're telling water districts and ratepayers and voters and what's going to be in the public financing documents about who ends up holding the bag when this thing can't pay for itself. Thank you.
Next speaker, state your name, who you represent, and 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. Bill Bird, Executive Director, Sacramento County Farm Bureau. Farmers and ranchers that make up the Farm Bureau, their position has not changed. They were opposed when this project was first announced. They remain opposed to this project for a myriad of reasons. You know, we have a pretty good idea of what happens when you take water from one area and move it to another. It's called the Owens Valley. It was turned into a desert. The farming communities there were destroyed overnight, and we're not even mentioning the mass extinctions of animal life that took place after that water was taken from the Owens Valley. Does not matter if this project is downsized. We're hearing downsizing talk from 2 tunnels to just 1 tunnel. We're still talking about the destruction of the Delta farming community, the loss of millions of acres of farmland, not to mention the environmental contamination that will take place when you put mountains of chemically laced sludge that's unearthed in any tunneling process. We know that support for the project is rapidly diminishing. We see major stakeholders that are falling off. There's really only one stakeholder that is remaining on. So the Farm Bureau would encourage the Legislative Delta Caucus to do anything within its power legislatively to put a stop to this project and look at other solutions. Assemblyman Frazier, you did mention that during your statement, that we must find a way to make sure that the central and southern regions of the state get the water that they deserve. Those solutions do exist, but at the same time, we can protect the Delta region. I urge us to look at those solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Good morning. I am Cynthia Lau. I work with Restore the Delta. I am here today to make a statement for Tim Stroshane and Barbara Barragan-Perea, who are busy this morning filing testimony with the State Water Resource Control Board. Mr. Stroshane wrote the initial letter to Senator Volk and Assemblymember Eggman requesting the audit of Cal WaterFix. Ms. Barragan-Perea worked on a number of the PRA requests and research that uncovered problems with expenditures for the project. They are also grateful that the Delta Caucus is holding this hearing today, but also want to urge its member to use their legislative power to insist that Cal WaterFix produces a peer-reviewed financial plan for the project that explicitly shows which contractors will pay what share for the project. In addition, we urge this body and the entire legislature to insist that Cal WaterFix produces a peer-review cost-benefit analysis showing the economic value of fresh water to the Delta, the San Francisco Bay, and the California coastal economies. There are key financial documents which must be completed before the state embarks on billions of dollars of new debt. Ms. Barragan-Perea also asked that I read this direct statement to you. When Restore the Delta was founded, I took on this work out of love for the physical environment and for the people of the region, both rural and urban communities. 11 years later, I have great fear that this project will harm economically working people throughout California who will end up paying the bill, who will not share in the economic benefits of the project, and who will be
I'm going to ask you to
outright
wrap it up. You're at 2
harmed
minutes.
by the higher water bills without securing future water supply. The legislature have the power to ensure that California builds an environmentally and economically sustainable water future and to rein in this boondoggle project. Please act thoughtfully and boldly. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please state your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes.
Adrienne Kane, I'm a Delta and Bay Area citizen. 2 issues. 1, thank you to the auditors for trying to protect the taxpayers of California. It's starting to sound like a sort of a Chinatown, Cadillac Desert, Owens Valley story. I'd like to know who I'd like for the legislature to go into a deeper dive and see who the stakeholders are there at URS. Who's the mysterious third party who recommended Hallmark to URS? Kind of look into some of that and see who's making money off of that. And And then it was mentioned by the woman from the water department that some of the consultants in the audit report have made recommendations on the governance structure. Are we bringing more foxes into the hen house? Is it the same people? We need to kind of have some oversight on that if you can help. And then the other issue is Plan B. I think is really important that we move forward with Plan B and don't wait for the water people to do that. And can we have more public help with viable alternatives, like a plan put out there for how much water storage is really possible and how much more water conservation is possible to do, and so that we can talk about that. Can the journalists pick more of that up again? Because if the tax plan goes through, California's not going to have the money for this project anyway. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next speakers, please state your name, who you represent. 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I am James Motlow, co-author of the book Bitter Melon, Inside America's Last Rural Chinese Town, which features oral histories and my photographs of the residents of Locke. Bitter Melon was named by the Commonwealth Club as Best California History when first published in 1988. It's now in its 6th printing, and I brought along copies for each of you caucus members. I lived in Locke for most of the 1970s and was fortunate enough to return in 2010. Today it is my community and my home. It's hard to imagine that anyone could disagree that Locke is a place worthy of preservation and protection. The Through Delta Conveyance Project, the construction of the intakes and fish screens it involves, poses a threat to Locke that cannot be overstated. This construction, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for literally years, will effectively destroy Locke. 100-year-old buildings will fall. Heavy truck traffic will make getting in and out of Locke nearly impossible, to say nothing of the noise from the pile driving. People will stop coming to Locke, the town will die, its precious history will be lost forever, and it can never be replaced. To support these concerns, I started a petition in 2017. No intakes, no fish screens, save Locke, save the Delta. We do not support the actions of the Delta Stewardship Council and their dual conveyance and through Delta conveyance plans. Today, there are over 1,200 signatures, with more coming in every day. And I have a flash drive which have all those signatures as we speak. This will not fix anything. This will destroy most of everything. Thank you.
State your name, who you represent, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Roger Mammon. I'm with Restore the Delta. I'm the president of the West Delta chapter of the California Striped Bass Association, and I'm a board member with the Lower Sherman Island Duck Hunters Association. And the Delta is very, very important to me because the activities I participate in are all Delta related. I want to thank Assemblywoman Eggman and Senator Wolk for getting the state audit going at the request of Restore the Delta. Their report has reinstilled some faith in our state government. However, their report is shocking to me in that when I was in the business world, how they have run from a $13 million budget up to $280 million, it's outrageous. There's no oversight. There should be some people either disciplined, demoted, or fired, and the legislature needs to do something about it. A comment made was that they were here to present to you the financial with questions about the WaterFix. Well, I don't think you were here about the financial position of the WaterFix. I think you were here for the people of the Delta and what the Delta means to everybody here. So I hope the legislature takes some actions with the incompetence in what this Department of Water Resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like you're our final speaker. State your name, who you represent, in 2 minutes, sir.
My name is Tim Newharth. I represent a family that came to the Delta in 1848. We're farmers and have been here, as I said, quite a long time. Just want to make a couple of comments on this meeting today. First of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for this panel, giving us a voice and a chance to hear what the latest situation may be. First of all, I want to comment on Ms. Minster's, I'm sorry if I didn't say your name right, comment about, a couple of times she mentioned that this was all about, or not all about, but a significant portion of restoring the ecological factors in the Delta. My common sense approach to that, or my question as a farmer, is how do you justify that by taking more water out of the Delta? We already know the Delta is hurting, the Delta's got issues. How does taking more water out of the Delta help in the ecological sense that the Delta needs to be fixed? Second of all, I asked Mr. Michaels, Dr. Michaels, if his cost analysis benefit was based on a $17 billion cost. He said yes, it was. Well, when the state auditors talk about going from $7.5 million to $22 billion to $280 million, we talk about initial costs going with URS going from $4 million to $14 million. This is just another example of where costs go in projects. I often tell people that my example of that is the Bay Bridge, which is a beautiful bridge, especially at night. It's just fantastic. But it started out at $1.9 billion. It's now at $19.3 the last I heard, and counting. So when we talk about a $17 billion cost of this thing, that's ridiculous. This thing's going to be $100 billion before it's said and done. We're talking about a 20-year project, so on and so on and so forth. So you add $100 billion into this cost analysis, cost-benefit analysis, and it just goes way out the window.
You have to have your wrap up.
So I thank you for your time and appreciate your consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looks like we have another speaker. Please state your name and who you represent. You have 2 minutes.
First of all, thank everyone who put this together. My name is Darlene Dawson. I am a past Commodore 2005 of Sportsman Yacht Club. Our Commodore spoke earlier. I have one question, but I will also like to say I represent the Pardee Home Museum. I don't know how many of you remember Governor George Cooper Pardee, 1902-1906, the earthquake governor, father of East Bay Mud. I wonder what he would have to say. Anyway, former DPC stakeholder, recreation, RBOC, PICYA, many of the organizations that have spoken. I have one question, it's to DWR, and given the content of this town hall meeting, why didn't you bring an economist with you? Thank you very much.
Is there any members of the public that would like to speak? Seeing none. First of all and foremost, I'd like to thank my staff and my colleagues on the panel for attending today. This is one of, I hope, several hearings that we can continue to bring the agency and the public and the legislature together, looking at other alternative projects that might be viable also or more cost-effective. So one of the things that is my commitment is the co-chair with Senator Dodd is that as we saw momentum building in the agency and the administration, that we wanted to make sure that the voice of the people in Northern California and the Delta were heard. Seen through the environmental process and through the town halls and city meetings that were taking place, that input was given, but it was not received well. And the process continued to go. And so my intention is to continue making sure that as a representative for the 11th Assembly District that your voice is heard. And again, not putting in jeopardy a third of the economy in California to benefit 2/3 of the economy in Southern California. There is another way, we just need to find it. And I think its collaboration is key. And so with this caucus, I'm proud to say that and appreciate the involvement of DWR today, standing up here. And I know it's hard, and I know that a lot of people are looking at you as somebody that they I don't want to say that. But thank you for being here. And and understanding that we are concerned. And I hope you bring that back to the folks that you report to, that we're not going away. And I also want to thank the State Auditor's Office. I said it before. You guys do exemplary work. I can't thank you enough for your unbiased professionalism in this process. And it was even acknowledged by DWR how professional you were in working with them. The public needs to know that you got their back, and the legislature, and that's refreshing to me, because coming from the private sector, you know, I had this preconceived notion of government when I got up there, and learning with the LAO and the State Auditor's Office that we have somebody that we can rely on. I can't tell you from the bottom of my heart how much I appreciate what you do. And these people need to acknowledge that also, that you are a value in the state of California. With that being said, we're going to do this again until we get consensus with our agencies. I'm not giving up. I know my colleagues aren't giving up. And with your support, we'll continue to make sure that this process is done in a correct fashion. Thank you so very much for being here today.